Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv, Wolok, and a returning guest. And again, one of my favorite writers for sure, and somebody I definitely appreciate his opinions and his writing, Bill Meltzer. Bill, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Yariv. Always a pleasure.
Yeah. I'm excited to have you on. I know we got to talk a little bit in the press box the other day, and it had me thinking, like, let's take the conversation back to the podcast so we can share it. All right, let's get right into it. The Philadelphia Flyers lost their last game to the Pittsburgh Penguins. I want to start at that. It was a performance that I think is not their best. They obviously were playing a team that didn't have all their weapons in. But the Penguins, that doesn't always really matter. And, you know, a lot of times if a team can play a really solid team game, they can get around those issues. And again, they still have enough talent to compete. You know, they are a playoff team, most likely, at least on paper. What did you think about last night's game? You know, did you think that the effort put forth was good enough to win? Or do you think that, you know, maybe they didn't come as prepared as they should?
I don't think it was effort per se. But what I'll say is this, you know, the Penguins, without Crosby, without Malkin, without Rust, who apparently is close to being back in the lineup, so the Flyers might have missed him by a game, without half of their starting blue line, and with Chris Letang just back off of COVID, you know, that's a team that, hard as they worked, and they are a hard-working team with a good process, to me, that's a team you want to beat. And, I mean, to me, the Flyers did not answer the bell right out the opening face. I mean, listen, they give up a goal in the first shift of the game, right? The first, I think, 12, 13 minutes of that first period, the Penguins took the play to them for the most part, and the Flyers' first power play went nowhere. Over the final about 8 minutes of the period, Flyers took over, which you would expect, right? That was okay. You know, they did go out down a goal, but you know, after a slow start, I think that they turned play in their favor, and they were heading in the right direction. You know, once again, the second period was far from ideal. That's been a problem pretty much all season. Even games they've won, they've had poor second periods. You know, right off the hop, they had to, I think, over-rely on Carter Hart to make some dynamite saves to keep the game 1-0. And they all had to get a little lucky a few times too, because there were a couple breakdowns where Penguins players were staring at half-empty nets and they missed the net. I mean, that's where they missed the Crosbys and the Rusts and the Malkins, because the process is always the same. That's one thing you can say with the Penguins. They're going to come out and they're going to play the right way every game. So, you know, they were creating chances, they just couldn't finish them. That's quite often the case when you don't have your best players. You know, Flyers did make some runs at them in the second period, went along. They did score in the one power play, and a great individual effort really by Travis Konecny. That was an unbelievable shot in close quarters. And then, you know, the Penguins put their foot right back in the gas pedal, even it was 1-1. And the Flyers seemed to kind of be playing with some borrowed time. And then there was a broken play where they scored. You know, I think Gensel fanned on a shot, recovered immediately. And that's kind of almost like a knuckleball effect. You know, Hart was just a little off his rhythm. And Jeff Carter went to the net, provided a screen, and lo and behold, it's in the net. You're trailing 2-1. You know, Flyers did have some chances. JVR had a breakaway. There was a 2-on-1 opportunity, and you know, they couldn't capitalize them. So you go into the third period down a goal, but you're still, even though they were outplayed overall, I'd say in the first 40 minutes, I would say they were outplayed in 28 of the 40 minutes. You know, you're still down a goal. You go into that third period, win the third period, you come away with points, which they managed to do, but you know, it's funny because if you look at just the numbers on it, the Flyers had the territorial advantage most of that period, but they did not create a lot of quality of chances, not compared to that first period. The first period, in those final 8 minutes, I think, Yariv, they had a lot of quality chances. They had a lot of shots in the third period, not a ton of quality. You know, they had to kill another penalty in the third period. Now, Aube-Kubel kind of got suckered into a little bit by Mark Friedman. Can't happen. You can't take an offensive zone penalty when you're down by a goal. You know, those are the kind of things that hurt them a year ago, you know, and that's just one of those things they have to clean up still. they had a power play of their own. Funny because it started with a 2-on-0 for the Penguins. They got 2 big saves from Hart, and then all of a sudden they're on the power play because of a high stick in the corner. And to me, I at the time I was thinking, okay, this is do or die time. Scoring this power play, I think it changes the complexion. They had some pressure. They couldn't quite bury it. They were like last night. They were just a little bit off.
Yep.
Couturier's passing particularly.
I was going to say same thing.
Yeah, he had connected the open a couple of times and put pucks behind him. Not like him, and then and then lo and behold, the Lawton line, which has been outstanding really all season, they just haven't been getting rewarded with a ton of goals until the last couple of games from Lawton. They got a turnover behind the net, boom, it's in the net. That was a nice finish by Lawton. So you steal a point between that that play and Hart's play, and then in overtime, really overtime can go either way. I mean, the Flyers nearly won it themselves on that play where Atkinson almost scored, and then they go the other way on a broken play again, and they score in a wraparound that just barely goes over the line. That's going to happen. I'm not so worried about that particular play, but I mean, I think when you look at the game as a whole, I think there were some good things to take away, but I think on the whole it wasn't good enough.
Yeah, no, I think you definitely touched on a bunch of things that I was thinking. The first thing is like Couturier, right? Definitely did. I wouldn't say he had a bad game, but he didn't have his best game. Offensively, he was not very effective. He seemed to have trouble making decisions, and the passing was just not there, and that was very noticeable. And that was all game. It's not like it was one period or whatever. It was the whole game like that. And I think to win games, especially when the other team's missing their key players, your best players have to step up. I don't feel like that was one of those nights. And I think the second line, some of that mojo that they were having, obviously is starting to go away. It's expected to some degree because Brassard is really not supposed to be your number 2 center. And obviously he's playing there because of Hayes. Do you think that there's any chance? I was kind of surprised it didn't happen during the game too, because a lot of those shots, like you were saying, were from the perimeter that the Flyers were getting, especially in the third period. And you're not going to win that way. And even when the Flyers have been getting outshot, it's pretty much what they've been forcing teams to do is just shoot from the outside. So are you surprised that there weren't any line changes within that game in the third period? And do you think that potentially we could see that going into the game against the Caps?
Well, here's the thing. They really like how the Lawton line is going, even though goals have been a little bit scarce. But they are just hemming teams in. They're creating turnovers. They're generating momentum. They want to break that lineup, and you're not going to break your top lineup. So that leaves you the Brassard line, and I don't think there's really anybody from the Thompson line who you would move up right now.
No.
Although I do like what Zach McEwen has been bringing in that fourth line role, but he's not the guy I necessarily want in playing more minutes, playing up in the top 6 anywhere. So they need better play from the Brassard line, and not just Brassard. I mean, the line as a whole. Individually they've all done some good things.
Mm-hmm.
As a line, they were clicking. I think in the opening homestand. They really, by the Florida game, they were struggling. They didn't have a very good road trip, and they've been getting hemmed in a lot. So, right now with the Lawton line, although again Lawton scored 2 big goals the last couple of games, but the line as a whole is not scoring on a very high percentage of their chances for all the chances they're getting. So it all has to come from the top line, has to come from the power play right now. For the most part, they're getting some contributions. So, I thought about, okay, do you maybe move Lindblom up a line? But I think part of the problem is, as you said, I don't think Brassard at this stage of his career, not to say he never was, but I think at this stage of his career, he's not a second center.
Mm-hmm.
And, some would tell you that Lawton, I know to me, Lawton can play anywhere, but, Lawton is certainly holding the fort as the third center, but, is he really a 2C? Not really.
Mm-hmm.
He's more of an all-around 2-way player, penalty killer, can give you a little bit of offense too. There's really nobody they can immediately, as we haven't even talked about the Phantom struggles, right?
I do want to talk about them a little bit later, yeah.
But the Phantoms finally did win a game, and some guys who you wanted to stepped up in the last game, maybe the last 2 games, but nobody's giving you that sustained kind of level of play where you're going to call them up immediately. Sure. So I think you're going to have to go with what you have for another game, and you hope that Kevin Hayes is ready to go against Toronto next week.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think there's any chance, because I agree with everything you said, right? And it's hard to break up a line when they're doing well. But I do look at the third line and I go, there's a reason that they're hemming teams in the zone. I mean, you're talking about three guys, one that are all physical, that know how to hunt the puck. And, I look at the second line, and not that they don't have that ability as well, but you have like kind of more pure shooters on the wing. Brassard is more of a playmaker. Is there any room there to even, I don't know, move up Atkinson, even though the top line is doing well? You move up Atkinson, you move Konechny to second line, maybe put him with Farabee and Brassard, or potentially move, like I know AV tried this in the Calgary game, right? He moved Konechny down to the third line, moved up JVR just to get a different mix, so they have to match up against the Flyers differently. Do you think that maybe and maybe it's not now because they have a winning record. Do you think if maybe they don't come out of this game in Washington, we should expect to see some kind of changes? Even though I do overall agree with you, and I think it's not always a good idea to panic and just because you lost the game in overtime to be like, okay, I'm going to change up the lines because of that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it should be closed to that, particularly in game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what they've been doing, honestly, is they've been playing the long line more. If you look at the ice times, the ice time for the Brassard line was down.
Yep.
So they were rolling the two lines that they rely on and mixing the fourth line in too. But I mean, I don't have, I think they should be open to any possibility.
Yep.
Look, they changed around the power play units already, which we could get into if you want. But there's I don't have any issue with making a tweaking. And the good thing in hockey is, unlike a baseball lineup, you can always switch back at any point, right?
Absolutely.
If it's not clicking, you go back to what you had before, and that there's no harm done in that. So
yeah, no, I totally agree with you. It's almost like you don't necessarily want to change the lines, but you want other combinations to fall back on, right? If a team matches you up or they have the book on you, and what you're doing is not working, you need something to fall back on. Guys who can easily slot together. Like, obviously we know Farabee and JVR have chemistry together. We know Lawton can play with almost anybody. We know Lindblom has had really good success with Giroux, but obviously with Couturier a couple of years back. So it's like, I just see that there are options, but I do want to dig into the special teams. And I think the PK has been okay. I think they're taking too many penalties. I think the PK can still get a little bit better. And I think Kevin Hayes and Ryan Ellis will be a big part of that. But the power play specifically, and maybe this is a case of Ellis being out of the lineup, I do notice, they're mixing stuff up, but I don't know if they necessarily had to. I like the idea of putting Atkins up top. Obviously, he's a great goal scorer, but the second unit was becoming a threat. And I was watching them, be as good as the first unit, regularly, with Provorov and Ellis back there, with Atkinson and Farabee and Brassard. And then now that they mixed it up, I feel like they're back to just the top unit is the one that's kind of relied upon to score, and the second unit is kind of a little bit more of a mess. And I like, everybody keeps knocking on Provorov running the power play. I think it's a little bit crazy. I mean, he's your number one defender. You want him to get going. You want him to have power play opportunities. You want his confidence to get higher. And I think he's not as creative as Yandel, but he gets the puck on net. He's quick. He's reliable defensively. He has a shot. He has a good shot, especially 5-on-5. But do you think it was maybe a mistake to kind of take Yandel off that top unit? I think it was more of a mix-up that they were trying to do, get more playmaking on the second unit. But I was kind of surprised that they changed it up. Do you kind of feel that way about the power play?
I was surprised that they changed the point. I'm not surprised that they made a few changes. Remember, they were 0 for 10 on the Western road trip.
Yeah,
so,
true.
I wasn't surprised they made a tweak or two. And not even the power play was necessarily that bad. They just, although I thought by the end of the trip it was looking a little stale and maybe you wanted to shake things up a little. Provorov overall has had a really good season. Yesterday was the first time he'd been on the ice for a 5-on-5 goal against, even though he's played with 3 different partners already.
It's crazy. I think he looks excellent. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, I think he's playing really, really well. He'll get his 5-on-5 points. I don't think Provorov is a guy who dwells too much on how many points he's putting up, although he can put up points. Mm-hmm. I really do think it was to, go back to I guess something. I don't know. They've used Provorov on PP1 a lot. I personally prefer Yandel on PP1 just because of how well he distributes the puck. I'm not going to dwell endlessly on it. I don't think Provorov is, has no place on a power play, or you move him up a little bit.
On Twitter.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I don't tell Twitter. I know. I think that, you know, I don't know. I mean, I would personally prefer Yandel up there, but if Provorov is up there, you work with what you have, and I don't know. I agree with you completely though on PP2, because I like the way they were getting some getting set up, moving the puck around. They had some looks, the early part of the season. Right now they're really not in any kind of rhythm at all. Whatever you're going to get, you're going to get from the first unit. And last night on that first power play, they got nothing. And then the second one wasn't starting out very well, but sometimes it only takes the one chance, right?
Yep.
And they said that was a tremendous shot by by TK. So, percentage wise, it's doing okay. I think they went into last night 20%, and the Penguins had the best PK in the league up to that point. So, I think that I don't think it's hurting the team necessarily, but I think there's an area to get better. And just real quick on the PK, I agree with you. I think it's definitely improved, can continue to get better.
Yeah, it's no longer a humongous weakness of the team, but you're not wrong about the penalties, especially of late. It's gotten to the point where they almost remind me of the Flyers of 6 years ago, where they were just always taking minor penalties. And I think that's why Aube-Kubel has found himself out of the lineup at this point. It's just, I don't know, I get why he's in the lineup. You see Brown play and he does things defensively well, but offensively he doesn't have much of an edge. Aube-Kubel does. But it does concern me. I believe the teams that win are the ones that are the most disciplined overall. And I think it's a lot of the momentum issues have been because of bad penalties. I mean, would you agree with that?
For sure. And absolutely. What I'll add to that too is it's a cumulative effect, right? When they had the games to finish up the homestand, they killed penalties well against Florida, and they were really good in the PK in the first two games. Edmonton had an unbelievable over 50%, and they only gave up one. I think it was in six power plays.
I think it was 7. Then, maybe it was 6.
Seven that game, and they had a whole bunch a bunch of penalties to kill 2 in Vancouver, and they got through all of those. But the problem is you keep taking them and keep taking them, keep taking them. There's a wear down effect.
Absolutely.
And I think a big part of the reason why the Flyers had no legs at all in Calgary. Yeah, you're playing 3 and 4. Really, I thought they'd spent so much time killing penalties where you wear your team down, and they had nothing going in that. And they also gave up a couple power play goals in that game too. So you look at the PK, but you would have put them to work too often. Actually, in the game against Arizona, I asked Carter Hart this: was it a relief not to spend time having to kill penalties that night just because of that wear down effect? He said, "Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Not that you can't kill them if you take them, but you're not gonna take 0 every game or even most games. But it was nice to have a reprieve from that for a game. So last night there was." A bad penalty in the mix, but it wasn't an excessive number. You can deal with 3, but it's when you get over 4, you get to 5, 6 or more that it really takes a team out of its rhythm. So they definitely have to cut back on a lot of the undisciplined penalties they're taking. Some of them are going to happen. Some of them you shake your head at, but a lot of them are offensive zone, lazy use of the stick or careless use of the stick. And those are the kind of things you need to clean up and take out of your game as much as possible.
Absolutely. And you can put at times where the Flyers probably won or at least scored a goal because the opposing team did the exact same thing. And, you look at the game against Florida, which, arguably the best team in the league at this point outside, I guess, maybe Carolina, and I'm sure a few others you could name. But if you think 7 penalties, it wasn't 14 minutes total, but it's a potential 14 minutes. And it's pretty close, actually, because I think it probably was slightly above 12 minutes. That's almost half the game killing penalties. It's like you're cutting your offense opportunities almost in half at that point. And they did well, and you can use it for momentum, but how are you going to drive play that way? Actually, let me ask you this. Are you concerned with the Flyers? I wouldn't say it's a huge concern, but they haven't necessarily been driving play the same way as they were in the beginning of the season. And it's not consistent, right? They're not getting a bunch of offensive zone time. They do tend to have troubles getting into the middle at this point. Do you think that that's a consequence of not having somebody like Kevin Hayes at the number 2 spot?
Yeah, and particularly Ryan Ellis,
Yep.
because he moves the puck so well.
Hmm.
I mean, right now, two of the three pairs are having some issues moving the puck.
Yep.
That's just gonna have to deal with that one more game against Washington. Hang in there. Having Ellis back will help. The second pair, it's been strange. I mean, I'm not gonna rip on Ristolainen. I'm not gonna rip on Sanheim. They've both had their ups and downs.
Hmm.
Some good games, some not so good games. It just seemed like there's only been one game where they were both on their game that particular night, or for the majority of those two games. Sometimes it's been one, sometimes it's been the other. So just one game where they've both been going. I think they'll I think that pairing will improve, but taking Ellis out of the mix, you're not slotting everybody correctly. Then you're
Right.
needing more from guys than they can consistently seem to give you. And like Nick Sealer on the third pair. Well, listen, there's no faulting his effort. There's no faulting his competitiveness,
Right.
his physicality. But Sealer's a guy who you fills in the lineup. You don't want him. You don't want him in your top six over an extended stretch,
Right.
which puts more minutes back up top again, right? Justin Braun has played his usual solid, steady game, but you don't want him forever up top with Provorov. So it's just the way you slot the pairs, and not just the minutes, the number of shifts, but who they're out there against.
Hmm.
And it's getting Ellis back and hopefully staying healthy, because that's such a big key, not just in the short term but in the long term to the season. Having him in the lineup, we saw it having an instant impact, right?
Absolutely.
I think in terms of possession, the other thing I'll say is that the second periods have skewed the numbers, because first periods have been generally good. Look at the two games against Vancouver. The Flyers dominated the two first periods, not just they came out of those periods in good shape in the scoreboard, but also just in terms of puck possession, quality of chances. And then the second periods, I can't name a second period this season where I thought the Flyers have been the better team.
Right.
And some of those second periods have been pretty lopsided the other way, and that's to be what skews a lot of those numbers. Flyers have been a good third period team overall. So you got to. I haven't liked the last two first periods. I didn't love the first period against Arizona, and I certainly didn't like the first 12, 13 minutes against Pittsburgh. Although the Flyers ended up I think with a shot lead by the end of that period.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that I think that if they could at least hold a little more even in those second periods, then the numbers wouldn't look so skewed.
What do you think it is about the second period? Do you think it's the distance from the bench that's creating an issue for the Flyers? Like, what is it about the second period that is causing such a big issue? Because it's at home and away. It's not just at home. So it's hard for me to say that it's a distance from the bench, right? Because in the away, it's a different scenario.
Yeah, I don't think you can chalk it up to that. I don't know. I really don't have the answer to that.
Yeah.
But it's clear that they have not come out on time in pretty much every second period so far. That's been the period where they really need their goalies to step up. I mean, they have.
Yeah.
They have. But you don't want to. That's not a formula for success over the long term. And you're not going to dictate every period, every play. But those second periods have to get better. I don't know specifically what it is. Other teams do adjust to you during intermissions, but you have to adjust. You have to counter adjust, and you have to be ready for what they're going to throw at you. And it's not just a coaching piece. It's really ultimately on the players to come out ready for every period. So it's something that's a work in progress, but absolutely has to get better. No question.
Yeah, no doubt about that. So let me ask you this, and we touched on it several times. So Hayes and Ellis, we still are not sure when they're coming back. Let's just say Wednesday for now, and maybe Allison shortly afterwards. How much do you think that really changes the dynamic of this team? From what I can see, again, on paper, and the fact that they've actually done a pretty good job, right? They're 5-2-2. That is definitely a successful start to the season. There are no panic buttons. The Flyers are in a tough division here. But when I see those additions, I see Allison coming into the lineup and pushing somebody out of the lineup. Most likely it's going to be Albe Kubel, right? And then maybe even Nate Thompson sits now, because if Hayes comes back, right, you can drop either Lawton or Brassard to the fourth line, and maybe Hayes plays on that second line to start. You have Ellis that'll come in, and Sealer drops down. Do you see that lineup from what you've seen right now, and then the addition and the type of boost? Again, you can argue a number one, number two defenseman, and then a number two center. And then a guy like Allison, who's kind of an X factor, is like, a bottom six guy at this point, but can score, can do everything for you, has a ton of energy. Do you think that kind of team is a playoff team, considering what you've seen so far with those, what I would consider big additions?
Yeah, I think that the Flyers going in, I had as a playoff team, not necessarily as a cup contender, to be truthful, but a playoff team. And once you get in the playoffs, it's all in how you gel running up to there, and then really come together at the right time. So look at Montreal last year. I mean, they only had one more point than the Flyers did last season. They played the Cup final, right? Totally crazy. So you get in and you see what happens from there. Absolutely, I think it's on paper. Now, Hayes has had 2 abdominal surgeries in a calendar year. That can take some time to come back from. You cross your fingers about no re-injuries. Same thing with Ellis, particularly because it seems that he has some kind of hip flexor, groin pull, seems to be the, although never confirmed, seems to kind of be what he has. He seems like he's close to playing. You just don't want it recurring. You don't want that all season long, in and out of the lineup. So, that I've been all in favor of taking a little extra time if he needs extra time. I do think that it's a playoff caliber team. Are they up there with the inner track teams that coming into the season? They have to prove that. And right now, they have. I mean, they've shown that they're improved. All the people that have said, well, it reminds me of last season when they were winning games, but they weren't playing well. And I can point to a bunch of areas where I think they look better. Yeah. We talked a little bit about the special teams. I think defensively, overall, the Flyers have been a lot better.
Easily. Forwards too deep.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they have not been giving up those backdoor goals that give the goalie no chance. Guys have been back checking. You have centers protecting the house. Yeah, exactly. They've been blocking shots when they have to. When there have been rebounds, they've been cleaning them up for the most part. All of those things you were not seeing last year. And what ends up happening is when the goalie has no trust in the D in front of him, he starts cheating and he lets in something leaky and they have no faith in him. There's that unraveling.
Absolutely.
And I don't see that. I really see, no matter what some of the numbers might look like, and again, I think second period skew it. I think they're a lot better defensively than they were, and that's without Ellis and without Hayes coming back. So that in and of itself, I think is a sign of hope. I think the team will score enough most nights. There's always going to be ups and downs. So yeah, I think it's a playoff team, but I think they have a lot to prove to be up with the upper echelon teams, is what I'd say.
Yeah, and do you think it's also the reason we're probably going to see, and again, I'm being optimistic here, I do expect an improvement, but there's so many new faces on this. Now you add Brown and McEwen to this. Do you think it's also consequences of all the new faces and how it's going to take time to kind of really, like, they're going to be good, but it's going to take time to really build that chemistry, almost like when you saw the Flyers were successful a few years back when they didn't even have Lindblom, they didn't have Patrick in the lineup, and yet it didn't matter. They weren't the most talented team. They were talented, but they just kept rolling through every team, and they won close games, 2 blowouts. They won everything. They won home and homes. Do you think it takes time to kind of build to that point throughout a season?
It does. I don't think you can get a read on a team until you're truly halfway through the season, but at least a quarter of the way.
Yeah.
Now if they can win in Washington, that's a big if. That's really a tough team you're playing, but you can start the season 6-2-2. That's a really solid start. Mm-hmm. That gives you a good foundation to build off of. 2 seasons ago, they went into November 500, and then they had the best record in the NHL in November. December, they were winning at home. They were losing on the road. They were thrown for a loop with the whole news about Oscar Lindblom, and then they had the big surge in middle of January until the pause of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole point is that you had a new coach that year. You did have some new faces, and it takes time for lines to gel. I think one thing that's been notable so far this season, Yariv, is that I think that Vigneault is taking a little lighter touch than he took a year ago.
100%.
He has not juggled lines much as we talked about, right? Like last night, he really showered a lot of praise on the team on a night where I didn't think we were all that good.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, he's more sparing in the criticism that he gives guys, and he's giving them more leeway to work things out among themselves. So, I think that's all part of that's all part of incorporating all the new faces and getting going. And I thought also last night during the broadcast, Scott Hartnell said something interesting. You know, that it really shouldn't be the coach in the room saying, "Guys, we need to be better when we work
100%.
tonight." Answer the bell, and hopefully it's some of the new guys who are stepping up, because that's really, they brought in all those guys who were A's for other teams. That's showing you have a new leadership core, and you know, it's taking off from there. But that doesn't happen overnight. That takes time.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that is accountability, right? It's not that your boss, right, which is your coach, telling you, "Hey, you did this wrong." It's before it even gets to him, you're going, "Hey, we did this wrong. We need to do better." I think 100% spot on. I think it's really interesting what you say about AV, because I kind of, obviously I've noticed it as well. And you noticed it even earlier. You noticed in the preseason and the way he was talking about heart and everything that was coming out. Do you think that's from feedback that he got from Chuck Fletcher? Because I would imagine it's from the exit interviews.
And I think with players, I think it came from feedback he got from players too. That there were times they maybe felt a little bit burned out, and a little micromanaged, and looking over their shoulders a little bit. And it looks like he's doing what he can to respond to that and adjust. Now, listen, everything has its limits, right?
Yes.
But the Flyers haven't had any games, hopefully this year, or this like the 9-0 blowout that they had, or the 8-2 or 8-3 the next time they play the Rangers. You have to say something after those games. You can't accept that.
Right.
I think other than the Calgary game, which the game was just going to be just one of those nights, truthfully. But I think they've competed every night. They haven't. I think so too. They haven't won every period. So I think for the most part, the coach hasn't had to crack the whip too much. We'll see as the ups and downs of the seasons go along. Yeah,
and I think it's a really good sign that he didn't take it personally. He learned from it too, because the game is obviously changing. The attitudes around the game are changing, and I think it's really important that he evolves with that rather than becoming a consequence of the world around you evolving, and then you continue to do things your way. I think Tortorella, who is a very good coach in his own right, has gone through that himself. I do want to talk about McEwen real quick, because you brought him up. I think he has been fantastic. I'm not saying I want to elevate him in the lineup. I already kind of expected this from him, but he is an element that I think this team has missed for a while. A fourth line player who has a scoring touch, who's physical, who skates much faster than I think anybody anticipated. He's aggressive. He doesn't seem to make much mistakes. And I think Thompson's done an admirable job. I think Albay Kubels has his up and down, but it seems to me like McEwen potentially is here to stay. Do you see a situation here where he gets re-signed during the season? Because if I was at the GM right now and I'd be looking at the way he was playing, I'm like, well, this is a guy that I'd want to keep around. And he's young, he still has an upside, and he seems to be fitting in perfectly.
Well, if they have a full healthy lineup, they're going to have some now Sealer will go down and things like that. But they're going to have a little cap figuring to do.
Yes.
The only benefit to Hayes being out has been that they've had the allowance and the long-term injured reserve. But I think they'll keep McEwen around. They might have to waive Brown, not because they want to or because they're unhappy. It's been only a 2-game sample size, just because a numbers game in the cap. Yep. I think they would like to keep McEwen around because, as you said, he's brought an element of what they've needed, particularly with with Wade Allison out. Now he doesn't have Wade Allison explosive shot. No. But, McEwen to me is a typical case of a guy who was a big scorer in junior hockey, can score a bit, in the American League. In the NHL, he realizes he's the fourth line guy. He brings physicality, he brings toughness, he brings a motor. And those are all things that they needed. And they don't need goals out of him necessarily, but he is creating some chances. He's had some scoring chances. Yep. You don't really, you're not really looking at your fourth line to score. Maybe chip in every once in a while, but I think McEwen has been really good. Thompson always competes. I don't worry so much about his possession numbers. Just don't get scored on. Don't take bad penalties. Yeah. He took one bad penalty against Florida, but on the whole, I think he's done his job as a fourth line guy. But I agree with you that when you have Hayes back, you're gonna have to juggle some pieces around, and he could sit a little bit. Yeah. Well, I was thinking about this though, as a full healthy lineup. Assuming that you sit Nate Thompson. I mean, I see a fourth line of I'm just throwing out an option here of Lawton, McEwen, and maybe Allison, something like that. That is got to be maybe the best fourth line in the league, and would be one that can score, can wear you down physically, can play defense. And I think when you have a fourth line like that,
you're just a much tougher team to match up against, because all of a sudden it's not like your typical fourth line. This is a fourth line that really is going to give you trouble and probably give your third line trouble. I think that's where it gets really interesting. I think McEwen's here to stay. At least that's how I feel about him at this point.
Yeah, I think he's certainly making a case for that. And it took him a game or two to settle in, which was totally expected. He only had one practice for his first game. I think every game he's gotten a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. I thought on the West Coast trip, the 2 games they won, he was really effective in those games. I wouldn't want him to come out of the lineup right now. It's Allison, I think, is still going to be a little while. He only just started skating,
right?
So he's got to work up to practices. He didn't have training camp. Remember, he got hurt during rookie camp.
It's true. Yep.
So I think it's going to be a few weeks yet with him. Hopefully he comes back and you don't have any other major injuries between now and then. And listen, I mean, Allison showed potential to be a top 9 guy.
Agreed.
Last year, and he could potentially still be that. But as you said, I mean, on a fourth line, it could actually do some damage. Hey, all the better. So, I don't, I think it's going to be a little bit on him, but until he's back. But, the pieces are there. Hopefully they can start to get some of this depth back that they thought they were going to have going in, because it's been tested.
Absolutely, especially Lizinski out as well, and Wisdom out, which I'm sure would help the Phantoms. I do want to talk about the Phantoms in a little bit, but I want to talk about one last thing before we get on to the Phantoms. Claude Giroux, he's still unsigned. Watching him play, and I still put this out, this scenario that I do believe that JVR the Flyers will look to move on from him, even if they have to buy him out. I look at the fact that Giroux is a UFA. I think if I'm Chuck Fletcher, I have 2 things in my mind, right? I made him an offer, probably wasn't enough, and probably wasn't enough term for what Giroux wanted. And also in the back of my mind, I'm going, okay, if this team stinks, I can get assets for Claude Giroux, right? Like I can go out, I can build for the future. I can get assets in the off season, and he's still a UFA. Maybe I re-sign him anyway, and I just move him as a rental, because I do believe Claude Giroux is happy here. And I keep hearing the Ottawa rumors. Doesn't make much sense to me because the Flyers are ahead of Ottawa in their development. I have no idea why Claude Giroux would want to go there. I could see maybe a playoff contender thinking, hey, this is the key piece we need to go to Stanley Cup. And I actually completely agree with them. So you can get a nice haul for him. But in my mind, I see the way Giroux's playing. I see the way he's shooting. I see his aggressiveness every night. I don't think he's had a single bad game. Hasn't had many bad shifts at all. Do you think he's kind of in a contract year play mode? And do you think the Flyers will probably work out a deal before the end of the season? Because that's kind of what my gut tells me, is that he's playing for term. I think the money is probably pretty close, average per year. I don't know if it's like $6 million or whatever, maybe between 6 and 7. But I don't know how you move on from the guy. I mean, he's over a point per game. He's on pace again to do his usual 80 points a year, maybe potentially more if he continues to go. And the offense, again, the team offense needs to keep rolling, the power play. I don't know how you move on from your captain when you're competing for, playoffs and potentially a Stanley Cup either this year or next year or the following. Do you see that with Claude Giroux right now?
Yeah. Let's look at the Flyers side first. If they were intending on moving on from Giroux, particularly in an off season where they're trying to change the culture, add pieces, add leadership, then why do you not ask him to waive his no trade? Why do you not name another captain? If you're not seriously considering him finishing his career here, the answer is that you don't. Right? Him still being the captain, him not being asked to waive his no trade, said to me that they'd like for this to be the rest of his career. If they can work out numbers, they can work out term, and for Giroux's side, well, I think he would like to try to win before his career is over. And if he's going to take a little bit of a hometown discount, not a crazy hometown discount, but a little bit of one, trading a little bit of cap hit for term, this is going to be the last contract of his career, most likely, unless he goes year to year like some guys do. You will cut the team some breaks and trade that for term, but you want to see where you're at, right? You want to see how his season goes. You want to see where the team is, and then you come to an agreement on a term and a cap figure. And that's really where I think it's been heading all along.
Yeah.
I had a discussion in the press box the other day with somebody who does think he's going to be playing elsewhere next year. I mean, I might be reading completely wrong, but I expect Giroux to finish his career in Philadelphia and finish as the second all-time point getter in franchise history, and then all those other things he's kind of working towards. And not that he's working towards numbers per se, but there is something to be said for spending your career in one city. Plus, he lives in the Philadelphia area all season. He does go back to the Ottawa area for the off season. He has 2 kids now. He has a family. They're settled here. Players consider all those things too.
Of course.
Maybe fans don't think about.
I do.
So I think that I think when you weigh where the likelihoods are, I think the probabilities are that he ends up resigning here. And I may be wrong, but that's what I think.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I think they were the reason that they decided to play during the season, because I think if I'm Chuck Fletcher, right, and I want to be a tough businessman, I go, okay, well, Giroux's towards the end of his career, so I want to give him $5 million a year for the next 3 years. And Giroux goes, well, I want 4 years at 7. Right? He wants the Pavelski deal. I think Pavelski got something like that, right? So, and he, in my opinion, he deserves it. So they go, okay, we'll start playing the season. We'll see how it goes. And then obviously I still think he's more than capable of doing what he's doing. And I think he can continue doing it majority of the rest of his career. Maybe the last year he might fall off. But I think he's playing for money and term. And I listened to what Chuck Fletcher said. I think it was maybe 2 years ago, but a year ago, he's like, we want Giroux here as long as he wants to be here, right? Like I can't see a situation how you move on from a guy who's probably getting his number retired. You're in a playoff hunt. If the Flyers were bad, then that's a different story. If the Flyers don't think they're going anywhere, then I can see that, because you can get probably a couple first-round picks for him, maybe a high-end prospect. So, yeah, I completely agree with you. I think he's playing for a contract. I think he'll be here. And I think most of the rumors that we hear online, that's from those cities because they want him, not because they're going to get him. Because I wouldn't be surprised if Ottawa calls and goes, hey, we want him. Or Montreal goes, hey, we need a center. We only have Nick Suzuki at this point. We want Claude Giroux. We want the French-Canadian guy to come home, right? There's so many options there. And I think a lot of rumors come from that, from teams offering a guy, not because he's actually on the way out, but because they see, oh, he's undrafted, he's available, right? And that's really what the rumor starts as.
Totally agree.
Yeah. So let's get into the final segment of this, and I want to talk about a little bit of the Phantoms. So the Phantoms have struggled this year. They finally got their first win, 4-0 win against the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. I didn't get to watch the game. I'm sure you did. Now, Morgan Frost had a couple assists in that one. York had an assist. Forrester had a goal. I think Gary Mayhew I forget who the other person scored a goal.
Yep. Mayhew had one.
There were 4 goals by the team. Clearly their best game of the early season. Things have been very up and down with 3 new coaches, a bunch of new young players playing together. So it's going to take some time. Not the most promising start, but Sandstrom obviously had a great game as well. What do you think about the Phantoms? Do you think Frost is kind of, especially when we were talking in the press box not too long ago, right, where he kind of gets benched in the third period. They don't tie the game. They don't get that point even, to the point that it is now, where I believe he's tied for the team lead in points. He's starting to put something together. The team might be heading in the right direction, because you look like Connor Bunneman doesn't have a point. Like, I look at guys who have already had success in the AHL. Glenn Denning has 2 points, and I'm seeing it more of a team issue overall, and they're really just having a problem overall as a squad. And maybe now it's heading in the right direction. I think maybe we'll see Frost producing more. But what do you think about the Phantoms, and what do you think about potentials of some of the guys within that group?
It was until I'd say the last 3 games, it was a real struggle. It was a real struggle. And the Phantoms were getting all kinds of power play chances. They were 2 for 30. I think they were 2 for 32 going into last game. They finally got a 5-on-3 power play goal. You mentioned Forster, and actually York and Frost had assists on that one. So he was all kinds of relieved that he got it. He scored a goal on the power play on opening night, but it had been really a struggle for Tyson. It had been a struggle for Morgan. It had been a struggle for really. You could name any guy up and down the lineup, and pretty much everyone was struggling. Tuamala cannot get into the lineup. He's only dressed in 2 games.
I was going to ask you about that as well. What your opinion on Tuamala is in the situation?
I think the time has come to send him to the OHL rather.
Yeah.
If he's not going to be playing, what happened over the last 2 games before that was that the Phantoms were playing from ahead, and pretty good opening 40 minutes, and then it fell apart on them in the third period. And they were leading going the third period. The games would get tied up, and you could just see that it sag a little bit. They did lose one of them in overtime, but that was a game that they probably should have won. But you could see improvement. You could see the process getting better. You could see more of a shooting mentality. You could see more of a sustained forecheck. They've been getting good goaltending pretty much all along. I can only think of one game where the goaltending has not been very good, but all the rest of the games I thought they were outstanding. Like the goalies were. So, Frost has not just that he has 4 points in the last 2 games, which is nice, and finally has his first goal of the year. But he's got his feet moving. He's making plays. He's been really sound defensively. He's been good in the penalty kill. Making things happen where you notice him making a positive difference. It's 2 games, right? He's got to string a bunch of those together, but that's a positive sign. I think Cam York will put it together at some point. It's been a little bit of a rough start for him. Zamula is just off of injured reserve. He's got to work his way back up a little bit. He's had some ups and downs in the early games. So, let's see. I guess one other guy I could mention is that Rubtsov has shown some moments. I was
going to ask you about Rubtsov.
So, got goal and a couple of assists, and just some good plays with a little bit of confidence again, because his confidence was so low at one point. So, it's one win of the season. They have back-to-back games in Charlotte this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. Let's see him take 3 out of 4 points there at least, and then before we say that the Phantoms are on the right track. But at least there have been some signs of progress in the last couple games, and maybe some guys can start, playing to a level where they can work themselves into the call-up mix, because on the whole, nobody's played to a level where you'd say, he needs to be up in the NHL right now.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. Do you think, and I brought this up, I was with Chris last night doing a podcast too, and, I brought it up. I brought Rubtsov up specifically because he's a guy that have not given up on him. It's hard for me to give up on almost any prospect, but I do see him building momentum. He is a 2-way guy. He's a guy that the coaching staff has liked in the past. I think he's a guy that they would like to give another opportunity to. Do you think that there's a chance, if there are injuries and it's more of a bottom 6 role rather than, a top 6 role, or even top 9 role with Frost, do you think there's a chance that Rubtsov might get a call up?
Maybe if he continues what he's been doing the last couple of games. I mean, before that, he was he was getting beaten a little bit defensively too, as well as no offensive confidence. Just moments here and there. It's really, I say their most consistent forward so far has been Max Willman, and since he's gone back down.
Crazy story.
So, it's you want to see a guy build towards it, but at least there's some signs of life and some hope.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's end it here, Bill. I know you got a game to watch and some interviews to do as well. Anything that you're working on that you want to let people know about? Just
want to give a plug to the Flyers Alumni Hall of Fame game coming up on November 15th. Most of the lineup has been announced. There might be another surprise or two on the way where Brad Marsh, the Alumni Association president, is working on getting 1 or 2 more guys to confirm. So that would be pretty cool. But it's those are always a lot of fun. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to the Hall of Fame inductions the next night.
All right, awesome. Yeah, I definitely think people should check that out. I'm pretty sure that Chris Mayer will have some coverage of that as well for our site. So definitely look out for that. Bill, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to come on and talk to me for a little bit. I really enjoyed this episode. I like it. It was just all hockey and all Flyers and no nonsense. So it's great. And thank you everybody for listening. Please subscribe, share this. It's a humongous help. Give a shout out real quick to our sponsor, Jim Steaks on South. Please buy their cheesesteaks. It's hockey season. Make sure to buy the cheesesteaks. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, always stay gritty.